Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the AALS, to Event Power, which is working all sorts of technological miracles, and to the other tech experts who are bringing us together today. On behalf of the section on global engagement, as well as the teaching methods section and technology, law, and legal education, teaching methods and technology, law and legal education sections, welcome to our program on virtual mobility. As you'll see, our speakers are going to be identified on your screen and their contact information will be on slides. We've decided to simplify things and not show you the short PowerPoint that we had prepared, but it will be available for you to take afterward, and we'll summarize what we're doing. But let me tell you first about the great group we have here today. And I'll do this as quickly as possible because we have an awful lot of topics to cover. Zooming in from Moscow, we have Marion Dent, Dean at the Pericles Center for International Legal Education. From California, we have Aaron Girardelli, Assistant Dean for Graduate Admissions at Loyola Marymount University, Loyola School of Law in LA. Zooming in possibly from Michigan, but perhaps anywhere between Oklahoma and Michigan, is Teresa Kaiser Jarvis, Assistant Dean for International Affairs at University of Michigan. Visiting from Knoxville, we have Melanie Reed, Associate Dean of the Faculty at the LMU Duncan School of Law. And then coming in from chilly Chicago, we have John Thornton, Clinical Associate Professor of Law. And from the center of the country as well, Jeff Thomas, Associate Dean for International Affairs at University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Law. I would usually be zooming into you from Philadelphia, so I am more or less in Philadelphia, electronic-wise. In any event, as you can see, our speakers have a broad range of experience. They are administrators of programs in the U.S. and abroad. They teach or administer programs that are live, virtual, or combined in terms of pedagogy. They have experience with governmental and university and regulatory issues. The other thing that you'll know about all of us is that we are all passionate about international legal education. We value what it does to broaden the horizons of our students and ourselves, what we learn from learning about other legal systems and international legal systems and law practice, and the perspectives that experience gives us on our own legal system and what we can do to help it progress. Although some of our schools are viewing what we've gone through for the past year as challenges, we see them also as opportunity, because those of us who are engaged in international legal education know that there's a lot of administration involved and a lot of expense as well. And over the past half year, many of us have resorted to creative means to bring teachers and students to our classrooms worldwide, to unite students from different countries in the same classroom, and to do all sorts of other creative types of actions. So although we have, again, there's no need to go through much more introduction, except that we hope to talk to you today about different aspects of strategic planning and teaching during crisis times like this. And also, how can we use the great ideas we're going to talk about after the pandemic is over? We're going to talk about investigation and developing programs, of problem solving, about creativity, about evaluation of programs and what works and what doesn't, about what the heck to do about our programs. Do we discontinue them? Do we put them on pause? Do we reform them altogether? What about working with our partners abroad? How do they and their needs fit in? How do we deal with government and university and even our own law school types of regulations? What about costs, quarantine, immigration, visas, all challenges to our students? All of these things are some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. Again, a couple of things. You'll see that you may see a lot of numbers in the chat. If you want to see who those numbers represent, just hit the refresh circle in your chat so you can see who the names of the other folks posting comments are. One of our helpful folks in the technology area will be sending the chat questions as they arise, and we'll deal with them either during or after the conversation. The other thing that's creative about us today is that we're not going to have one panelist speak at a time. Rather, our speakers are going to comment on a variety of topics, sort of like a conversation that you're all welcome to. And we'll see how smoothly everything can go. So first, we're going to take a start with course and program development. And Marion and Jeff, if you could take the start of it and tell us your perspective on how to go about finding host schools or partners abroad. And again, we have Marion, who is abroad herself in Russia, but is regularly developing relationships all around the world. So again, Marion and Jeff, tell us a little bit about this perspective on working with partners abroad. Marion, do you want to?
Jeff, should I go first? Or? Okay. All right. Well, as Diane said, we are in Moscow, the partner abroad. And in fact, in this year, we launched a partnership for a dual MJ program with Widener University, Delaware Law School. So we're really excited about that. But that has nothing to do with global engagement via Zoom, or via enabled by the pandemic and distance classes. But what we have done is we've expanded our Jessup McCourt training program where we teach international law, legal research and writing, oral argument to a dozen schools, not just in the Moscow area, but all around Russia and Belarus and Uzbekistan, where we were using professors who were in Moscow, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy this year. So that was kind of an exciting outreach. But I'm kind of a curmudgeon because I don't think that it works just stepping out to start a relationship with another school halfway across the world if you're trying to just start it online. I think that you need the in-person contacts first, and that's what's worked with us very well, because all of these schools were schools where we knew people, whether it was moot court coaches, professors, writing instructors, not necessarily the administration of the law school, but just enough to know people and gather trust with them. And I have to say, we've gotten this summer and fall 2 very serious contacts from U.S. law schools trying to reach out to do dual online programs with us. And, we haven't gone for either of them because we just don't know the people. And it was just like telephone cold calling, that somebody phones you up and says, our school is so wonderful and we've got these wonderful programs and wouldn't you like to join with us? And, we explored it a little bit. We talked to them via Zoom and, we just said, look, we've got programs with the schools that we know and they're working. And so if we jump into something else with an unknown quantity, we're going to be all of a sudden, taking the resources away from the programs that are just taking off and expanding because of the ability to do things online. So we have been working with a lot of professors all over the world, but in terms of the schools, we haven't been reaching out that much unless we had some kind of contact that says, we trust these people and you should get together with them. So I guess that's the main thing I had to say about it. Although maybe if you are looking for schools abroad, think about the language level of the students in the school that you're seeking to contact with, because we had to do 2 totally separate programs of the same courses but taught at different levels of English ability this summer when we were doing this program with Belarus and Uzbekistan, because they just had totally different English abilities. So I would suggest, actually, if you're thinking of joining together with another school in another country, bring in some of the teachers as guest speakers first. When we launched this program with Widener, we had Dean Smola from Widener come and do a lecture on election law. And he started out by doing the lecture, and it was about halfway through the lecture when he started taking questions from students that he realized that the level of his lecture was way too low for the level of our students. And he was able to pivot and adjust because he's an experienced enough teacher, and get the level right. So now we hope that when we come in for joint classes with Delaware, that the level's going to be right because they will understand that background. So that's about all I had to say. And watch out for time difference, because time difference drives you crazy, not just with the students, but with the teachers. And I hadn't thought about also, you have to think about the time difference from the partner schools that your partner school may have. Because we are doing the program with Uzbekistan and we're thinking, okay, 3 to 4 hours ahead of us in Moscow, and our teachers are only an hour or two behind in Western Europe. So we adjusted all the classes, and then we found out that the Uzbek school had partnerships with Mongolia and China and Japan, and we had students who were studying from all of those locations that were taking courses at 4 a.m. So think carefully about time difference, not just with your schools and your partners, but your partners' partners. So I guess that's it. Okay.
I'll just jump in and make 3 quick points. Building on really what Marion's saying, the first point is that I think you should try to leverage the current relationships that you have. And you normally think about that as your faculty who have relationships, or your own relationships if you've built them. There are also relationships on campus or relationships in the community. We have a partnership that's built on a sister city relationship between Kansas City and a city in Brazil. So look for the relationships that exist and try to leverage those. Cold calling is not the easiest way to do it. It's not impossible, but it's not the best way to make a relationship. Second point I want to make is that you really need to try to find an institutional and programmatic match. Marion talked a little bit about the level of English, but it has to do with prestige. It has to do with the kinds of emphasis areas or specializations that you have. And it's not necessarily that it has to be the same level in terms of prestige. A less prestigious school might pair with a more prestigious school where there's good partnership opportunity because of some sort of programmatic aspect or because of language. So, but you need to think about this strategically, what a good match is. The third point I would make is consistent with what Marion's saying. You really have to invest time and energy into building the partnership. And ideally, that does involve face-to-face meetings. And you can't just go sign an agreement and assume that the relationship is going to happen. It has to be persistent. You have to go year after year. You have to go multiple times in a year. You have to invite people to your campus and go to their campus. And now with all of the online programming that's available, you can have a Zoom meeting instead of having to fly there face to face, but you still need to look for those connections where you could have face-to-face connections and build relationships. It's really about the relationships, and it's the personal relationships that help the institutional relationships be successful. We've got successful programs that have developed because of a vice president who came to our campus, not to the law school, but to the campus, who then got interested in the law school, and that's been a successful relationship. I mentioned the sister city relationship. And then the third example I'll use is our continuing legal education program actually built a relationship with some people in Rome that has evolved into a school-to-school relationship that's been a very, very productive exchange relationship.
Terrific. Thank you very much for starting us off with some really terrific points. And even though I was off screen, I was nodding my way through that in agreement. So the great ideas about networking, and I'm wondering how we can translate that into talking a little bit about finding and training teachers, whether it's teachers from our own schools or teachers from partners abroad. We want to ensure that we have quality teaching and now ability to manage remote teaching. So, Melanie, if you could speak to that a little bit. I know you're very experienced with it, and Marion as well. How do you go about finding the teachers as well? Is it different from institutional types of relationships?
Thanks, Diane. I'm coming from a professor perspective. So I wanted to create an international collaborative experience for my students in a comparative law course without them having to leave the comfort of their own home, because this was online, remote learning. So coming from that perspective, I was looking for relationships with professors overseas that would be willing to have that kind of team-based learning concept, and we could collaborate in a course together. So as far as advice for finding like-minded teachers, I would suggest a few organizations that I've found helpful. Obviously, this AALS section on global engagement, but also I attended a SEALS Global Outreach Committee session this past summer where I fortunately met Diane and several professors overseas from the ELPIS network, that's ELPIS. And they were very interested in collaborating. Professors from Germany, from Portugal, that were interested in collaborating. And I think I would second what Marion said about time schedules. You have to be flexible. So you want to find professors that are willing to do maybe short-term projects, not necessarily throughout the course, because, for example, Germany doesn't start their semester until April. Bosnia starts midway through February, and we're starting next week. So you kind of have to have a partnership with someone that's willing to maybe do part of the course together. Another suggestion would be the ABA's Rule of Law initiative. They focus on legal education reform overseas, and that's one of the projects that I've been involved in. And the international section actually has a committee that is dedicated to the international legal education and specialist certification. So they have various conferences and times where you could meet. I mentioned ELPIS. Another one where I found to be helpful is the American Society of Comparative Law. They have conferences. They have a very strong younger comparatist conference where I've met several professors that come to these conferences from overseas. They have a mentoring project. Those kinds of environments I've found, especially over this past year, I didn't have to go to Europe to meet other professors overseas that would be interested in doing short-term projects to kind of fulfill this idea I had of creating a course with an international collaborative element. So those would be my suggestions.
Thank you. Marion?
I had to find the unmute button there for a second. From my side, I found that the pandemic has actually made us finding teachers from abroad much easier, because previously, of course, when you had to bring over someone physically, you have to find somebody who is available for a fairly decent portion of the semester. To us, it didn't make much sense to bring somebody to drop in for a week here and there academically. It's better to bring somebody for at least a portion of the semester, which in our country is 12 weeks. As Melanie says, it changes per country. But now we found that, of course, you can bring somebody in virtually, but also both professors and lawyers are a lot more stationary than they used to be, because if I would have, let's say, an adjunct professor who's a practicing lawyer at a firm that maybe they have an office in Moscow and they can stay for part of the semester in Moscow, but they're going to hop off to conferences and hop off to a client work in another city. And now they're able to do it all from their desks, or forced to anyway. So I found that it's a lot easier for finding teachers. And there's another benefit to this that I had never really thought that I would notice until now, but it used to be when we brought a professor out, the expense of flying somebody out and housing them and getting visas and making sure everything was smooth with their visit. It didn't make sense to bring a professor out for a semester to teach just one course. We had to ask them to teach 2 or maybe even 3 courses during the semester to make it financially viable to bring them. And so now with professors available to teach via Zoom, I can have one professor teaching the securities regulation course and another teaching mergers and acquisitions and another teaching business orgs, and don't have to bring one professor out and say, you've got expertise in all of these courses. Can you please teach them while you're still also trying to see your way around Moscow and visit St. Petersburg and things? So it's a lot more practical for both the person who wants to be a visiting teacher and for the students who have more voices to hear and more variety of lecturers. So I really like that fact. The kind of drawback to that in a way I see it as an advantage, but in another way as a drawback, is that there's a lot of people interested in teaching abroad now via Zoom who have never taught foreign students before, and sometimes who really haven't been teaching this last semester, so haven't been teaching distance learning at all. And so I'm finding a huge learning curve for the professors, and I'm spending a lot of my time, because we don't have anybody on staff who can be trainer of professors. So I'm spending a lot of my time doing training programs for our professors, and we're finding for our visiting professors, and we're finding that people need a lot more structure professors need a lot more structure than they might have been used to teaching to domestic students. We all know that you need more structure when you teach online generally, because there's not those body language clues that there are when you have the group of students that are looking at you and your movements as well as just your face on the screen. But the foreign students have more trouble with that. So you have to be very structured, and you have to understand that they may have different expectations from the professors. Like they might not expect to read before the class unless you've gotten together with them before the class and told them that. And they might be used to having multiple quizzes and having a different structure of in-class type activities. They might not be used to being called on in class, or they might not be used to speaking up or challenging the professor. They just, I've had especially the Belarusian students that I've had in class have just been nodding their heads, and we're going, no, fight with us about this. So it's been a different style even for us. And also the language, the language level when you're speaking in person can be even more loose than when you're trying to impart the same information via Zoom. We've got professors who come out who are using idiomatic expressions. Guess what, guys? Baseball analogies don't go over well outside the United States, and professors who are using the type of language that you would expect, say, a second-year student in the United States to know, such as mentioning that you may have a Commerce Clause issue when you're in a class that's not related to constitutional law. The students haven't taken a constitutional law class previously, so they have no idea what you might be talking about. So that type of thing is very, very common problem. And I can give one example that we had an adjunct professor who used to be a full-time professor at Baruch College of Business come out and teach antitrust, or sorry, not come out and teach antitrust, teach antitrust via Zoom. And it didn't go over at all because his analogies were so American, and he was talking about the Great Depression. And the students were saying, what's that? So as you bring in the history of antitrust and this president and that president, what they did, they have no idea. So it takes some getting used to what the class will understand and what they won't. And we found one solution that worked fairly well with that, and that's putting a local professor in the classroom as well and having the class almost team taught. But that local professor could be in charge of saying, I think the students aren't understanding this point, so let's, explain this a little bit more or something, rather than teaching a class in, having a Russian professor teach American antitrust wouldn't work, obviously. So that type of thing is a potential solution to those professor learning curve issues that tend to happen when you've got brand new professors dealing with foreign students, or I should say not brand new professors, but professors who are new to dealing with foreign students. And then also I just want to mention political issues because we're in Russia, and I've had professors come up this semester and assume that what the United States thinks of Vladimir Putin is the same as what Russians think of Vladimir Putin. And not at all that way, right? It's we're on the opposite ends of the spectrum. So you need to be a little careful about that. And also, if you're dealing with graduate students with LLMs who are interested in U.S. law, they might be, if they're studying on Zoom, be working at the same time. And so the professor asks for examples from their work or their experience, and you might be running into a lot of client confidentiality issues that you don't realize, or they may understand but don't want to not answer your question because they think it would be rude. So just think of those types of issues. So I guess that's about all I have on that.
Excuse me. Thank you. Excuse me. Both Melanie and Marian for those insights. And I think what we're going to do is, just so that you all know out there, some of the other topics we were going to speak about technology next and exercises. But I think that, especially with what Marian led us to, is that one of our other topics is challenges that our students face. And I think that you've brought up in your comments the challenges that both our teachers and those of you running programs and our students face. So let's turn to challenges next, and we will get back to those other topics involving technology, assignments, administration, those sorts of things. But we have a whole cast to speak a bit about the challenges that our students face, and some of them do deal with legal language, what we're teaching in, with plagiarism, all those sorts of things. And so Aaron, John, and Jeff, we're going to speak to some of those issues that are very much related to what Marian just raised. So Aaron, why don't we hear from you first?
Of course, yes. And I think it's a perfect transition because Marian said something very important, the fact that we don't have to assume that international students have the same type of knowledge or background that American students and American professors have. So we always have to engage with them thinking that many of the things that we give for granted might not be fully known by these students. And this works not only in terms of the substantive part, not only in terms of how the Constitution works or historical facts about the US, but also in terms of how to properly function as a student in law school. And one of the challenges that I've seen this year that we are all teaching remotely and having these programs offered remotely is that students now, international students now, are living like in a bubble. So they don't have the opportunity that usually they have to spend time together on campus with other international students or American students and learn by osmosis, learn from these students about how to function as a student in law school in the US. So many of the things that we usually give for granted, even more than before, we need to stop for a second and carefully think whether an international student will be aware of that. One of those issues is, for example, plagiarism. Plagiarism, which is a very important topic in American law schools, is something that many of the international students are not aware of, or they're not aware of the importance of avoiding plagiarism. And mostly because several reasons. One of them is, for example, international students usually many countries tend to take exams only orally, not in writing. So they don't really spend a lot of time writing. And so they don't really face the issue of plagiarism many times. But also it's in terms of the way international students interpret sources, textbooks, articles, and so on. What they usually tend to do is they usually try to memorize the rules, they try to memorize concepts, and they get points when they're able to basically repeat those particular parts, when they can cite a rule, when they can cite a case, and so on. So for them, citing a source is kind of an example of being a good student. And they don't realize that if they don't properly cite the particular source, they're going to have a problem with plagiarism. They don't understand that there are limits to do that, and so on. Things that, for example, here at Loyola Law School, we usually teach them at the beginning during orientation, but we realize we need to do a better job. We need to do a better job making sure that these principles are properly understood. And we can't think that somehow what we teach them during orientation will be enough. And we can't think for sure that they will still understand some of these important points just by talking to other students, or just by sharing their experience with students on campus. Because again, they're in a bubble. They take their classes online for a few days a week, and then they don't really have a space where they can meet other students. Just as an example of something very unique that happened recently this semester at Loyola, and we were kind of struggling to find a proper way to address the problem with the student, also in terms of plagiarism, is we had a professor who during the semester shared with students a model answer for one of the previous exams that he gave to students. Then the final exam was somehow similar to some of the issues that were presented to the model answer. And so the student, one international student, used many of the parts in the model answer in his or her paper, in his or her exam. So the issue here was plagiarism, not based on a source from a website or a law review article, plagiarism from your own professor, basically, like copying what your own professor said in a model answer. And that triggers all different problems, not only plagiarism, but also understanding what the meaning of a model answer is. Why do we provide model answers to students? What are they supposed to do with a model answer? How they're supposed to use a model answer? So these are all issues that are somehow under our radar all the time, but they become even more important when you teach remotely, because again, a very important component of the law school experience, which is sharing information with other students, is kind of lost when you do everything online. So that's kind of what I wanted to stress out.
Yeah, I would like to second basically everything that Aaron has just said. Our students at Northwestern come from all around the world, and part of why they come for an international LLM is not just because they want the U.S. law school experience and they want to learn about U.S. law, but they also want to live in the United States and to experience life in the United States firsthand. And of course, this year they're not being given that opportunity if they're still at home in their own countries, and that's difficult for students. And as Aaron also said, they're in their own bubbles at home, meaning they're in their home countries where they still hear their native language rather than English virtually 24/7, except for when they're physically in their Zoom classes at law school. And that is a difference that I was greatly worried about at the start of the fall semester. In order to get in here, students have to have huge TOEFL scores. Well, that's great. But getting a TOEFL score that places you in the top 1 or 2% of all TOEFL test takers doesn't necessarily mean that you're well equipped to survive at a U.S. law school. You need immersion in English, 24/7, and that's a great benefit. Often I see our students really look sort of overwhelmed and struggle for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the fall, and then they gradually get their sea legs and things get better and they adjust. And I was really worried that if they were sitting at home in their apartments in Beijing or Moscow or wherever, that they would not be able to do that. Now, we just concluded like everybody, we just concluded our fall semester. Granted, I hate to make generalizations based on one class, but I am happy to report that they did better than I thought they would. I didn't see as much of confusion as I had expected in that regard. And something that was also interesting, maybe this was just an outstanding class, but part of coming to the US, and this is something that I've just thought about in the past couple of days really, is the great majority of students do quite well. But you've probably all experienced 1 or 2 class students who really struggle in your classes. And part of why they struggle is they endure a phenomenon we all know as culture shock. And when you experience culture shock, you sort of go into your shell and it's really hard to function. And what was fascinating about this class I just had is I didn't have the 1 or 2 students at the bottom that I normally have, and that sort of go and sort of spiral down to the bottom of the class. Everybody did pretty well. Normally, everybody does pretty well, but 1 or 2 students really struggle. And I didn't have anybody that really struggled this time. And it occurred to me, again, this is a very, very, very small statistical sample, but perhaps that was because they weren't undergoing and experiencing culture shock in another country. They were Zooming from the comfort of their own home and their own culture. So, that there may be a silver lining to that particular cloud, or at least there was in this past semester. I guess I'll get to see this next semester if, knock on wood, if things still, work out as well as they did in the fall. And to the other point that Aaron made, plagiarism, it did sort of correspond more with my fears, which is that plagiarism is a difficult idea for many of our students to culturally grasp in terms of how the U.S. and in particular U.S. law schools have a very strict view of plagiarism. Whether or not your law school has adopted a hard version of the so-called 5-word rule, law schools all have their own definition of plagiarism that's often very strict and really hard for legal writing students to grasp. And I did see a little more of it this past fall than I did in previous semesters. And again, it could be because by being in their home culture and not getting it repeated, as Aaron said, by osmosis, not picking up throughout the whole U.S. law school environment, no, this is what you have to do in the U.S. Maybe they fell a little more prey to doing things the way they're used to doing, and so there was a bit more of a plagiarism issue. In no case do I want to say that any of them were what I would really consider academic plagiarism. It was more sort of legal writing sloppiness, as in the case of students who would take a quote of 10 or 15 words, they would provide a citation but forget to use quotation marks. Not something where they were literally trying to pass off somebody's work as their own. I had more trouble with that than I typically do. I always have a certain amount of trouble with that in any semester, but I think I did have a little more trouble than usual this semester. And it might be for that reason.
So I want to be a contrast to John. I found that teaching online to students who are overseas, that the language barrier, which is really, really significant, and I saw in the chat box that there was some questioning about that. When I look at a student's language ability, I tell the student that that's just as important as their legal analytical ability, that it is so important to have good English that, it's of equal weight. So that's a huge issue. And what I found in teaching, and I think my circumstances are different than John's, I was teaching a class in China at a Chinese school, and the students were in China taking all of their other classes in Chinese, and of course doing all of their other work in Chinese, and their day-to-day lives were in Chinese. So I knew that would be an issue, but it was a much bigger issue than I realized or that I expected. The immersion experience of being surrounded by English is really, really beneficial. And I've always thought that from a cultural standpoint, but here I'm seeing that it's important from an academic standpoint, that the English immersion improves their English and helps them to perform better in class. So how is it that you can address that problem? Well, one of the things I saw in the chat box was that, you could do some translation, and that is a possible solution, but it's very cumbersome and it really slows down your class, and it starts to undermine the English proficiency, which is typically one of the objectives of teaching in English. I frankly think that in my circumstance, the biggest adjustment that had to be made is that I had to adjust my expectations. I had to slow down. I had to have to simplify the work that I was asking the students to do, simplify my exam, simplify their final project in order to address that English problem. But I also want to circle back and use this as an opportunity to come back a little bit to technology. By teaching via Zoom, which was the platform that was being used in China already, I was able to record my lectures and transcribe them. And having to transcribe just electronically, I didn't have to do it manually. The software will transcribe the English. And so my students all would go back and listen to the lectures again and read the transcription so that they had a better understanding. So I thought that was a very handy technological solution is perhaps too strong, but a technological tool that helped to address the language problem. With respect to plagiarism, I think that's an endemic problem that we're always going to see with foreign students until we reach a sort of an international level of what plagiarism means, and that's probably way off in the future. The biggest adjustment that I make for that in my own personal teaching is to assign the kinds of projects for which it's difficult to do plagiarism. A traditional research paper is the worst kind of problem. And I recognize the model answer is a great idea, but it does create these problems. So when I gave my students a model answer, I made sure that it was a problem that was quite different than the one that they were doing so that they wouldn't copy the model answer. I wouldn't see it coming back to me.
And if I may add one small thing following up on what Jeff said, and John said also in terms of English proficiency and how the immersion changes when everything is online. From the side of an administrator of a program, this also means that you have to be able to quickly adapt your admissions criteria to the program. Admissions criteria on one side, and on the other side, the academic support that you provide to students. Because, and I'm sure it's the same for every school, we always have a minimum required TOEFL or IELTS for international students. And sometimes we have students that have a score that is really borderline. And we may tend to say, well, I think the student will be able to perform because we know that with a full immersion in a few weeks, the English will pick up fairly quickly. But when everything is remotely, that's going to change. And so maybe we need to be more strict in terms of admissions criteria. or if we still have the same admission criteria, we need to establish maybe a stronger academic support program, because we know that there will be more students maybe struggling with the learning experience.
So I now want to add something to what Aaron said, because he reminded me of a point I wanted to make. The idea of academic support is a great idea, and I want to tweak it a little bit and suggest that it can be offered by providing English language support, right? Not necessarily translation in class, although that is one thing you could offer. But instead, what we've tried is to have a supplemental instruction model where you have a student who acts as sort of a mentor and who will help students go over the work afterwards where they don't really understand. And so they have a role model because it's a student. They have somebody who's often an ESL student, so they help them with their language. Sometimes we use these kinds of students as teaching assistants to provide feedback on written work and so forth. So thinking about this from the standpoint of academic support, but modifying it to think about legal English as opposed to just academic support for legal work is another good strategy. And then the other strategy I want to throw out is that, and a lot of programs do this, there's a summer program to improve your English before you start the LLM program. And there are now a few places, I know Georgetown is one of them, that are experimenting with an online legal English approach. And so if there are language issues, look for online resources. Certainly there are resources that aren't legal English, but are English resources that are very available online.
Thank you. We have a lot to cover. So I think these are all excellent ideas again, and I love the interaction, and I hope all of you out there are getting a lot out of that as well. Rather than turning to technology and exercises now, I want to skip to administration of programs, and we'll skip back. And for this, I mean, Teresa and Jeff, these are main aspects of your jobs. And Teresa, let's start with you and hear more about the overall administrative aspects, quarantines, visas, all kinds of troubleshooting that deal with these programs. What I'd like to do, just so everybody knows, since we only have about 20 minutes left, is if we could spend about 5 minutes on this, then go back very quickly, maybe go around the table and hear about technological and assignment types of things that people do, and then a little bit more about student life and wrapping up, and we'll see what we can do. We have a few questions that are in the chat, and I hope we'll be able to get to them. So Teresa, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Diane. So I'm going to actually approach this from a broader administrative perspective, which is the danger that a pandemic has presented for those of us who run international programs, right? In times where there's no travel, it's very easy to say that, well, you no longer have a job, or your office doesn't do anything anymore because you can't run international programs when you can't be internationally, right? So we're lucky, I think, at Michigan that we have we're a little bit ahead of this danger in that we have distilled abroad programs or international programs into their more component parts, right? So a lot of these programs that we all run and the initiatives that we have are actually proxies for skills and abilities that we want our students to gain. I'm talking primarily about JD students now gaining international abilities. And so the conversation is, well, we send them abroad. We provide these international opportunities for them. Well, we can't do that very much right now on the smallest scale. So what are you doing? What we've managed to do is distill these into sort of 4 different pillars. And 3 of these pillars are things that can be done even with no international travel, so even in times of pandemic. So the things that we realize we really want our JD students to learn from an international perspective is another legal system, in addition to the common law, some facility with a language other than English. We want them to have networks of fellow lawyers around the world that they can draw on throughout their careers. And then we want them to get abroad in a legal context, work or study. That last piece sort of reflects on a lot of the things that you've heard our other panelists talk about, which is gaining the cultural understanding and absorbing the language in an immersive environment. Some things that you really just can't substitute for while you're at home. But these other three things we can, right? We can teach students another legal system while they're here in the U.S. We can use it with online classes, with partner institutions, and we can do it with our own faculty. We can help them build relationships with other people from around the world. So we focus particularly, of course, on JD students and LLM students getting to know each other really well. We've really worked hard on that this semester because it's really challenging when people aren't running into each other in the law school environment, right? So one of the things that we did was before school started, we made an intro book of all of our LLM students with their name, a little bio about them, and some of the things that they like to do for fun. And I sent that out to every JD student and said, don't forget, one of the things you need to do while you are a Michigan JD student is make friends and build networks around the world. Here's a book of 40 people, this year it was 30, people from around the world. They're already lawyers. They would love to get to know you. Flip through them. Their email addresses are in there. Reach out to anybody who looks to be of interest to you. And people have done that. So they're able to start building those connections. The other thing that we did is working on the second language skills, right? So that's a tricky thing to do when students are studying law. Ask them to also study another language, right? So we tried to add it in sort of natural ways and pair it with other opportunities. In particular, again, this ability to build your networks and make friends. So we are taking our LLM students who are native speakers in other languages and putting them in the driver's seat and letting them have lunchtime sessions where they're getting to talk about whatever they want to talk about. We work with them to just make sure it's something that would be of interest in their own native language, right? So they can be taught, they're going to talk about, for example, judicial systems in French-speaking countries, right? They can talk about some of the research that they're doing. They can talk about what it's like to be a lawyer, what the legal culture is in their country. It doesn't have to be a hard law topic, right? But they will talk in their native language, and JD students of all levels in that language are able to join, and it's just for fun, right? So they can practice, and that way they build these connections as well. So now they will identify immediately on Zoom other JD students who are interested in the same language, and have these LLM students who led the discussion are native speakers in the language that can become friends. So, like I said, those are the three things that we are doing: the language, legal system, and relationship building that don't rely on travel. So in times of pandemic, we can continue to provide international experiences and opportunities and skill building for our JD students. And I said, I think I'm quite grateful that we've had that, because I think it is just really easy now for other administrators and institutions throughout the university to assume that there's nothing going on in your world right now because you can't travel. And I think that's quite unfortunate because there's a lot more to international legal education than simply programs and sending people abroad. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff, did you want to talk about program administration issues?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment because I know we're getting short on time. So the main thing that I want to say is that there's a paradigm difference between those of us who are working directly with students and those who are working at the university. The paradigm at the university level is risk management and risk avoidance. So they're very, very concerned about something going wrong. And as a consequence, they tend to make very draconian rules to try to protect the university from liability. The individuals who are involved in this know that there's always some risk and that domestic risk exists, and yet we don't have rules for domestic travel. We only have rules for international travel. And so our paradigm is we want our students to have these experiences, and if there are difficulties along the way, that's part of the learning experience. The one piece of advice that I have, besides just identifying the paradigm difference, is the thing that I found most effective is to schedule a meeting. You actually sit down face to face with the university administrators, identify the student issue, talk about how to solve the problem, and they've been much, much more helpful. So even though they set a rule that says we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, if you come to them with a particular issue and a particular problem, say, we have this situation, we have this opportunity, how can we make this work? They tend to be much, much more helpful. So now after I get the missive that comes by email that says, we're not doing this anymore, I know that when I have an issue, my response is, it's time to schedule a meeting. So that's my advice to you.
Great idea, and great also to have a university, like some kind of a committee that you are involved with, where you're not just operating within the law school, but you're talking to the folks at the business school and also the broader university committee. We probably won't have time to talk a lot about things like in terms of visas and quarantine type of issues today. But what I think we should do with the next 10 minutes that we have, and I'll try and include a couple of the questions we've gotten in the chat at the same time, is just to go around the screen, and I'll do it kind of going around my screen, mention to you the questions that have come up, but also to have you comment upon the other things we had hoped to discuss. For example, Melanie, someone has asked about how you set up your course, and in terms of, I know some of the things folks have just talked about, collaborative assignments, that's something that your entire course included. Other folks, Jeff and are also going to talk a little bit about technology. Some folks were going to talk about exercises. So what I think we want to do is go around the room, and everybody has about 2 minutes, which you can waive all or part of if you want, to just talk about those kinds of things, an exercise you did or something else that you've done with respect to student life, building student life outside the classroom. And then hopefully, I think that there is a section meeting later today. We can continue some of the conversation there, or we can set up some other kind of meeting time. But Melanie, since I mentioned you, why don't you take it away on that, and you can respond on the question briefly about your course and assignments or student collaboration that you've created.
Sure. I worked with two Bosnian law schools, Sarajevo and Banja Luka, faculty there. So I had 20 U.S. law students and about 15 Bosnian law students, and we would meet in Zoom once a week for 2 hours. And we identified particular topics at the beginning of the semester that we wanted students to do research. So we had students that would present for about 15, 20 minutes on this particular topic. My students were asked to write a paper on that throughout the semester, but we compared the US laws to particular Bosnian code. And so we would start with that presentation and then spend another 45 minutes having an informal discussion basically around the Zoom room with the Bosnian faculty and their students. And what I found was that the students in Bosnia were used to a much more passive lecture style. So we had to try to kind of prod them a little bit to get them engaged and interact. It was very beneficial to kind of force people to go around the Zoom chat and discuss this particular topic, and the faculty would kind of prod with different questions that related to the particular student topic of the class. So it was very helpful. I'm going to piggyback off what Teresa said. We also had what we did, we called them like student matches. So we did something similar where the student that's in charge of that topic, who had to write that paper for that semester, was given a Bosnian student match. So they would, outside of class, meet on Zoom with their Bosnian counterpart to discuss the criminal code as it related to their country. And I mentioned those other relationships that I was able to cultivate this semester, that I actually had a Portuguese law professor who had an administrative law class who was interested in collaborating. And so we also matched them with a law student in Portugal. And based on these relationships that they had throughout the semester, they were able to create some really deep critical thinking on some US laws based upon what they learned from their matches and from these discussions that they had in Zoom.
Thank you. Terrific. Teresa, you're next to Melanie on my screen. Is there anything else about student life that you wanted to talk about?
I wasn't going to talk about student life, but you were talking about some things that might live past the pandemic, and that was what we managed to do this semester was allowed students to do some classes virtually at a law school outside of the United States. So like study abroad, but virtually in only some classes. So it's like the foreign institutions courses now became part of our curriculum. And I think, I think that was an amazing opportunity. And I hope it's something that we continue to pursue, even post-pandemic, because as long as we're comfortable letting students take classes online, it can potentially open up a vast array of courses for students to take without having to commit to doing a full semester at another institution. They can stay at home or anywhere in the world and take classes at their home institution and add in one or two from other law schools around the world. I think that's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Thank you. Erin, I know you were interested also in talking about student life issues as well.
Yeah, so one thing that we do at Loyola that works fairly well is we have established an International Students Association made by international students. It's fully managed by them. They create events, they create networking opportunities, they try to build relationship with other JD students associations. And the nice thing about that is that we have, given that we have an intake of new international students every semester, the new students, for example, starting in spring, can join the association, and they will basically join international students that have been with Loyola already for one semester. So these will help the transition, will help them understand more about the things that they can do in our community, how to take advantage of all the different offerings that Loyola has. And this kind of also makes me think that everything online is, of course, presents some challenges, but also presents a lot of opportunities. So Loyola has never had so many events happening on campus virtually like this year. So it's like every day there is something going on. And so for students, even if they are in another country, different time zone, most of these events are registered, recorded. They have an incredible opportunity to see these events, and thanks to the International Students Association, they can also easily connect with other international students and JD students as well.
Terrific. Marion, did you want to talk also about some of these issues, like how your teachers come up with exercises in class, or another issue?
Sure. I mean, I can talk about one, thing that we came up with, which was to address the same problems that Teresa was hitting on so heavily, that the students have very little ability to connect. And Melanie's and Erin's ideas also help students to connect. So what we did was we started a kind of high school institution of study hall. And we, at the beginning of the semester, sent the students to a small group study hall to set their goals for the semester. And we told them that we weren't going to come back and check on them, and that it was certain, only for their own purposes, so that they didn't have to feel pressured or anything. And some groups didn't really set goals. They just gossiped, and other groups were very serious about their goals. But the point of the whole thing is we kept them meeting with the same study hall periodically throughout the semester. And by the end of the semester, they all had a good group of friends from different cities around everywhere. So that was one thing that we found worked really well. And then another thing that I want to try, I haven't yet, and this is an idea stolen from Jay Finkelstein, and I don't know if he's in the audience here, but he's been adjunct professor at Stanford and Georgetown, and he teaches a cross-cultural negotiations class where he has students in one country negotiating with students in the other country on an issue that kind of continues through a whole semester of a negotiations class. And I would really like to find a school to try something like that with, because I think it would be a really cool international workable idea.
That's a great idea. And talk about developing cross-cultural competency. That would be crucial. John and Jeff, let me turn it over to you for your last few words, whether you'd like to have it about exercises or technology.
Well, I'd like to speak for a minute just about general approach. You know, we talk about how our students have missed the opportunity over the last year to be immersed in the U.S. culture, language community, as well as law school community. And one thing that I've really tried to foster this past semester is to make our Zoom synchronous classes a sort of ongoing communal event, almost a family event, if you will. We had a student who was in Kazakhstan, and her 9-year-old daughter came up, and I'm guessing 9-year-old daughter came up and gave her a kiss on the cheek. And you could, during class, and you saw her smile, and you saw all the other students sort of go, oh, you know, and it was just a very, very warm class. And I think that really, that as much as anything else, helped the students feel part of what we hope law school in the U.S. will be, because as somebody else said on the panel today, they're in so many cases used to more formal classes, lecture-based classes where the students are kind of passive and they don't say much. And just the idea that we're all expected to speak, we're all expected to contribute, we can all support each other, and we can all be friendly about it as we do it in a rigorous academic environment that is still supportive, is something that I think really put people at ease, and it made a lot of what we all struggled with Zoom and the technology problems much easier to deal with and much more tolerable and much more ultimately pleasant.
Terrific. Jeff.
I'll just make one last comment. Along the lines of interactivity, I think that having students do exercises that are like the exercises our students do in the United States is a great thing to do. But in doing so, in recognition of the language difference and the difference in terms of interactivity and background and analytical ability, I think what we need to do is simplify the problem. So that's the first point. And then the second point is you need to give really, really specific instructions. If you give them really, really specific instructions, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, then they'll do it and they'll learn from it. And I think that it's so easy for us to assume background knowledge. We give somebody an assignment, say, act like a lawyer, and they know how to do it in the US. But overseas, they don't really know what that means. And so I think being very specific about the instructions, taking them step by step, and making the problems more simple, but still ones that demand some analytical ability, produces really good results. So I encourage us to keep experimenting with that kind of thing.
Thank you. I want to give a couple last comments and then see if we can fit in the one question I don't think we've gotten to. But my comment is what a great variety of conversation we've had today. And I think that we've talked so much about both the technical and what goes on in school and in planning, and also just how to build a family and a professional network and a professional network at the same time. And I'm hoping that, I think we talk a lot about training our international students and training our students. It sounds like we could come up with a great resource or set of resources for training ourselves to teach international students and to teach U.S. students in combination with international students with all the types of things we've talked about today. So if anybody wants to be involved in a project like that, just let me know and I'll share it with the group. There was one question, if we have another minute, there was just a question about attendance. And if anybody out there would like to handle the question on what to do about attendance and students just not showing up and that sort of thing, because a couple of our attendees raised that issue about what do you do about, failing people or deciding how to handle students, particularly from abroad, who don't show up. And I don't know if one of you feels like you've dealt with that a lot. Aaron, it's yours.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share a feeling that I'm sure many other administrators of international programs had this year. At the beginning of the year, I was panicking a little bit because I had no idea whether these students were going to class, whether they were attending, where they were, and so on. So Luckily, technology helps because we are using Zoom, and Zoom takes attendance basically, so you can get a full report. So very quickly, the school decided to ask professors to take attendances and report back if a student is missing. We had a few cases of international students who were missing classes. For the majority of them, I would say it was just a lack of understanding of the importance of attendance, even if we told them many times, and it was included in all the material that we gave them. We just had to be strict. We made some exceptions only when students are from in countries where the different time zone is really making it difficult for them to attend, for example, a mandatory course. So in those cases, we may allow them to skip few classes. But in general, we just need to be strict because attendance is very important.
Thank you very much. Checking with we have our monitors in the classroom with us. Looks as though we have to switch out because I think we can remain on here until we're closed out, if you like. But thank you all for attending. Please feel free to share ideas with us. And our email addresses will be on the slides that will be available to anybody who's interested in anyone you want to share them with. Okay. Okay, we will not
Thanks,
protest.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Nice working with you all.
It was a pleasure.
Awesome job, Diane.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.